I'm going to move to Hennie now from DHL. And Hennie, if you could just touch on a few issues. First of all, it would be great as a sort of, as I mentioned in the intro, as the frontline private sector operator. Sometimes we talk a little bit macro, I know, but you have the real nuts and bolts feel on the ground, and those are the really valuable insights that we benefited from as we developed the Africa PLC platform, as well as some of the Continental Business Network's responses to some of our heads of state that are looking for supply chain related counsel to immediately tackle COVID-19 issues. So it'd be great if you could just please share with us, first of all, your views on the logistics challenges and dynamics that you've experienced around the whole COVID-19 scenario on the and then also if you could give us some of your recommendations on how to perhaps fast track achieving this paperless customs agenda in Africa, because you deal with every single customs administration in one form or another in Africa. And finally, if you could just also give us, everyone has their views on COVID-19 has shown us how we've underinvested in infrastructure, how we get a lot of our inputs globally, and now we have to reconstitute and reconfigure our supply chains. What does that mean in English? Can you paint a picture for us about, from your standpoint, what you think we should be building, where and how we should be investing in that, and what ultimate benefit you think that would have for the African Continental Free Trade Area? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Hubert, and thank you for the opportunity. Good afternoon, everybody. And yeah, I think it was interesting listening to all of you, and in terms of your approach and your angle. And I think mine is certainly probably from the other side of the table, being from a more practical, what is it like on the ground kind of experience. And perhaps just to put it in perspective for everybody, we deal in every single one of the 51 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think we've got a fair bit of experience as to what happens. I think if COVID has helped the world to understand the importance and the role of logistics better, that is certainly one thing that has been achieved through COVID, and the complexities of it. So you would, and I'm very cognizant of the time, so I'll try and be brief. But so the first one is, so how have we found the challenge of COVID on the supply chain? And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to give you just a real brief context to that you understand some of the complexities. In Africa, roughly only 20% of the cities are connected by one commercial flight per week. I'll say that again. In Africa, only 20% of the cities are covered by one commercial flight per week. So that should immediately give you a bit of a sense of the lack of connectivity, interconnectivity we have in Africa. So what we've seen as a result of COVID, and I'll bring the experience down to maybe Southern Africa a little bit, and a little bit as to what's happened in West Africa. So when we experienced lockdown in Southern Africa, two things happened. We saw an immediate cancellation of commercial flights, bearing in mind that we have got massive reliance from a logistics perspective on commercial flights. Suddenly we lost that ability to bring freight into Southern Africa. And I use the term Southern Africa very specifically because in their consideration of lockdown, I'm not convinced that the South African government considered the impact on Southern Africa. And it's important because a lot of the trade emanates from South Africa into places like Swaziland, Lesotho, Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and so on and so forth. And by restricting that into South Africa, it had an immediate knock-on effect into the rest of Africa. And forgive me if I delve into a little bit of detail, but I hope it'll bring to the fore some of the practicality of what's happened. At the time of the lockdown and the identification of essential goods only, we as DHL immediately on that evening saw a cancellation into double digits of chartered flights for freight. And why did we see that? because at the initial announcement, government said only medical essential goods can travel. And what they forgot was the interconnectedness between general cargo and medical cargo. And medical cargo in itself is not enough to warrant cargo flights to come into South Africa. And as a result, we just saw a massive cancellation just from a DHL perspective on cargo flights. That meant that we stopped the supply chain into South Africa for a period of 3 days. Now, the knock-on effect of that was, as this happened all over the world, those charters got reallocated to elsewhere in the world. So 24 hours and 36 hours and 48 hours later, when you went back to companies and said, I'm ready to charter a 747 now, they said, it's been reallocated. It's been allocated to transatlantic because at that time, Asia Pacific and China and Pacific came back online. And if ever you wondered what gets produced in China, now's a good time to go and look at it. Because every single airframe that you have available in the world is being deployed on that route. So those are some of the practical things, Hubert, that happened. Something else that then happened is they started imposing decontamination protocols for inbound flights. That's something that wasn't available in this country. So the practicality of that was, even if I had the freight, even if I had the freighter, we couldn't adhere to those rules and we lost another 24 hours around that. And the last issue, and I know this is immense detail, probably not appropriate for this forum, I just want to give everybody a little bit of a flavor of how it impacts real supply chain for people and economies on the ground. The last issue was they wouldn't allow pilots to get off aircraft. Now, as you all may or may not know, pilots have got certain flying hours and rest hours that they need to maintain. That meant that we could still not bring in the required aircraft. And lots of little bit more detail. But I think my point is just simply, what is the point? In getting all of this to the point where they announced the regulation, there was one important miss in all of that, and that was the collaboration of the private sector. And had they collaborated, we could have highlighted. Now, in fairness to them, they did listen, and we lobbied strongly for a period of about 72 odd hours, and we saw a whole bunch of these rules and restrictions being lifted and or amended. And that meant that we could bring in the medical equipment that was so desperately required. We could support cargo flights by combining it with general cargo, and the cargo could get offloaded and stored elsewhere, but we could also start opening up supply chains into the surrounding countries. So I think that's quite important, just to understand from a practical implication perspective. So for us, to emerge from this stronger, we absolutely need the inclusive collaboration. And therefore, I'm quite excited by this forum and what this means. And the important part is, why a company like DHL, I think the choosing of the partners are quite important. And when you have companies, and there are other companies, it's not just purely DHL, it brings along 228 other country experiences with it to the table. It makes for a fairly rich conversation. If I then just really quickly move on to the next one around digitalization and paperless trade on the customs arena, it was incredibly interesting. One of the previous speakers spoke about the need to kind of get rid of paperwork. And I'll give you one little example. I like facts and figures if anybody is wondering. At one point at the height of trade, for us per week, we needed to file anything between 500 and 800 kilograms of paperwork because of all the paperwork requirements. So roughly call it a ton a week. It doesn't bode well for us. It doesn't bode well for the facilitation of trade and the seamless trade. Out of the 51 countries in SSA, only 8 are using risk-based profiling, which is based on the data and image documents as at the end of 2018 for customs clearance. And the remainder wants to physically see the shipment. Now, that in turn means that 41% of custom regimes in Africa still insist on 100% of inspection. Now, post-COVID, that is not sustainable. That is definitely not sustainable. So, those are some of the facts. We've got 39 countries in Africa that uses Asakuda. The other countries have got their own versions, but with no BCP. So there's no business continuity planning when that goes off. One of the previous speakers spoke about the lack of investment. And now, if you go to some of these border posts, and I've visited many of those across the breadth and the length of Africa, Some of them do not have electricity at the border post. So even if they are computerized, they cannot use it. So this is an incredible opportunity for us to fast track this paperless trade. I think if anything that we've learned, just look at what we're doing here today. Pre-COVID, this would have been a meeting somewhere, probably in Europe, probably London, might have been up in Ghana, it might have been in Johannesburg. So what COVID has actually forced us to do is to quickly adopt technology. And I think we should take that frame of mind, that mindset, straight into what this could mean for Africa and that Africa Free Trade Agreement and the acceleration of e-trade. Sorry, there was quite an echo coming through. Why the e-trade? So yes, e-trade will absolutely facilitate and speed up trade in Africa and the supply chain solution that comes through. And why is that important? It's important because if you look at the cost of transportation in Africa, logistic adds anything from 40 to 55% to the cost of goods. Part of that is because of the time frame it takes for the product to its final destination. In Europe, that ratio is 3 to 7%. So that's the first immediate benefit for us. The second benefit is if you look at Africa, there's a little bit of low-hanging fruit. If you look at our ease of doing business in Africa, we're pretty low down the chain there. If we look at it, Africa is at the bottom end of it. Kenya is 61st place, South Africa is 82nd, Nigeria is 146th. So the ease of doing business will immediately improve with digitalization and the adoption of e-trade. But the other thing is it closes down opportunities for fraudulent transactions. Now, we all know about the corruptness index in Africa and the fact that Africa are unfortunately making up all of those main spots. By taking away that opportunity, it will further improve Africa's standing in the global economy, and it'll help us improve our position from a macroeconomic and a trading perspective all around the world. So that's a little bit around the customs. And again, I'm very cognizant of time and where we are. I think the third point that you asked me to look at, Hubert, was what does it look post-COVID? I think they're two very, very important elements. I've already mentioned the lack of intra-connectivity in Africa. It will be even less post-COVID because you're seeing all of the big airlines, Ethiopian Airlines, to mention one, South African Airways. It is unlikely that they will exist in their current format. With the lack of tourism, and one of the previous speakers referred to that, coming back on mainstream, certainly for 2020, we'll continue to see a lack of airframes or aircraft that will give us uplift opportunity. That means an operator like ourselves. Now, under normal circumstances, I already operate 15 aircraft to connect Africa. This means I would have to charter more aircraft, or alternatively, we will be in a weaker position to regularly serve all of the countries. Huge implications for trade. So what does that mean? It means that we have to continue to rapidly, at a macro-continental level in infrastructure, we have to be able to get through to countries by road or by rail. Hugely important. The second part of that is this digitalization. If we look at our intra-Africa trade, Hubert, we're sitting at around, well, depending which report you read, between 16 and 18%. The Americas is in the 54, 57% range. Europe is in the 70, mid-70s range. So enormous opportunity here, but we need to be able to connect to one another. And last but not least, this is just, and I understand that I'm taking this to a very practical, detailed level. I just want to give you a final example of some real low-hanging fruit. If we can just get within the different trading blocks, so be it ECOWAS, be it SADC, be it the East Africa Trading Community, if we can get a meeting of the minds, just as a real simple example, to say border posts that are functional should be open 24/7, 365, we will already see an immediate and significant improvement in trade in those blocks. And later on, those can be expanded to become Pan-Africa. So I'll stop there. Again, I'm cognizant of the time. Those are some of my thoughts from a practical perspective. I'm excited about the opportunity where policymakers and private sector can come together, because what COVID has certainly showed us, it has absolutely showed us in a practical way the issues and the discrepancies between reality and perhaps where policymakers sit. And if we can breach that gap through forums like this, it's an amazing and very exciting opportunity. Thank you very much.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.